All right, the NHL is back. Me and Copel both very excited about that. Today we're going to be going over the Atlantic Division. We're going to be talking about some of the newcomers, some of the players that have moved on to a different team, but mainly just going to focus on the Atlantic. Going to rank the teams in order that we think they will finish this year. So without further ado, Copel, start from the bottom here. Who do you have at eight at the bottom of the barrel this season?
Yeah, so for the bottom team in the Atlantic Division this season, I actually am going to still roll with Buffalo. I think this is a very competitive division, and I think just when you look at the competition in the division, I think Buffalo still is probably the bottom of the barrel team. They did get Lindy Ruff from New Jersey, which I think was a great ad because he kind of started his career in Buffalo. Obviously, he works with a younger group of guys, but I think a common misconception is everyone's like, oh, well, Buffalo will get better because they're younger, but we've been saying that for like 6 years now. Buffalo's honestly not that young anymore. A lot of their younger guys have developed kind of the potential that they were. Like Tage Thompson, we know who he is. Rasmus Dahlin, we know who he is. They have a potential good goalie in Levi. He's looked pretty good so far. I think Buffalo has some young pieces still. They still have guys that are progressing slowly, like Cousins and players like that. But they're not ready to compete with teams like Boston, Florida, Toronto yet. Even teams like Tampa Bay and Detroit have an edge over Buffalo. And I think just with how loaded this division is, Buffalo still just isn't going to be able to creep their way into a wild card spot, never mind seventh place.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. I have them at eight as well. I just, didn't see too much improvement out of them over the offseason. I think they're still in rebuild mode. This is a team that towards the bottom and scoring goals, 40 and 40 last year, so 86 points. We saw them step it up a little bit. They've been a team in the past that has been brutal to watch, and then having Tage and Darlene, like you said, I think they're, great leaders, great players that should stick around for a long time. But the competitiveness of the Atlantic Division, this team is nowhere near the top, in my opinion. Too much in the middle of the road, with the top teams. I just think that Buffalo is a long way away from even being a wild card team. And when you look at teams like Montreal and Detroit and Ottawa, who definitely made some improvements this offseason, I would even put those teams ahead of Buffalo. And I think that they're probably a step ahead of them. They did bring in a couple of new players. They brought in Jason Zucker, who's a veteran. We've seen him bounced around, a bit of a journeyman. Brought in Lafferty, who was on a couple different teams last year, and they also signed Luukkonen to 5 years. So it'll be interesting if they decide to go with Luukkonen as the starter, or are they going to have Devin Levi come in and get most of the games? I believe Luukkonen is the starter right now, but I expect them to split. And they also brought in guys like Avi Kubel, and they re-signed Peyton Krebs, who they got in that Eichel deal. So they've, kept a little bit their depth around, but there's not enough star power on this team. And again, when you're playing in a division like the Atlantic, it's as competitive as it gets. So I really think that, Buffalo, they don't have enough gas in the tank to make a playoff appearance. And I think putting them at eight is fair to say. Number seven up next, there's a couple of different options you can go. Obviously, I'm sure we're on the same page here when we're saying Montreal, Ottawa, or Detroit, just based off of, playoff teams in the last couple of years. These teams haven't made the playoffs in a while. Montreal has been in rebuild mode. Same thing with Ottawa, and Detroit's definitely brought in some veteran presence. They brought in Tarasenko this offseason. Obviously, Kane last year was dealing with an injury, but came back. Saw glimpses of him in his prime last season with Detroit, but still a lot of work to be done there. I think for seven, it's going to be Montreal for me. I like a lot what they've done. They call him Wi-Fi, even though he hates that nickname.
Oh, Jack Eye.
Oh, yeah, Jack Eye. Other than that, they got Line in a trade. They really didn't make too many improvements. I think they're really relying on their young guys. Cole Caulfield definitely going to have a big year. Very exciting player. And Sam Montembeault, I think they're going to have to lean heavily on him. He didn't have a great year last year, but I think he's going to be the clear starter this year in Montreal. And they're expecting him to emerge as at least a top 15, maybe even top 10 goaltender. So I have Montreal at seven right now.
That's a really good pick. I'm known to have hot takes, and I already have one at 7. So I actually don't have Montreal here. I'm actually going to roll with Detroit. So I have the Red Wings here at number 7. The reason here is Red Wings are actually one of my personal favorite teams. I've always liked the Red Wings. I love a lot of their players. I love guys like Lucas Raymond, Dylan Larkin. I love Patrick Kane. I love Tarasenko. They have a lot of good pieces. The problem with this team is that they're goaltending. And I think that this is the biggest problem. And that's why I'm putting a team like Montreal ahead of them because they have a goalie in Montembeault. They just waived Billy Husso yesterday. He hasn't played great. He's had an okay career. He started off in St. Louis, obviously. He went to Detroit. He hasn't been spectacular. Detroit's flipping around a million different goalies, and they don't have a solid decor yet. I love Mo Seider. I couldn't believe that they dealt Hronik a couple of years ago to Vancouver. He was a really good defenseman. He still is. He's making a lot of really good plays up in Vancouver. So I think that when you look at Detroit, I mean, they added Cam Talbot in the net. So he's another guy. Now they have him and Alex Lyon, but that's not going to cut it. That's not going to make you a playoff contender in this division. And Tarasenko is coming off a cup win with Florida, but with his age, he's obviously on the second line now. How much of an impact will he have? I need to see guys like Larkin and Lucas Raymond, who have been in Detroit their whole career, actually step up and make big time plays in big time games because we haven't seen Detroit in the playoffs in a really long time. These guys are really good in the regular season, but they never seem to make the cut. And how are you going to last with the teams like Boston, Florida, and Toronto, just like Buffalo? I think that on paper, Detroit looks amazing. But honestly, with a couple of games of sample size to start the season and with them putting Husso on waivers already, I don't know how much I can put my faith in Detroit. For me, at least Montreal, a team like them, they have a little bit more youth, in my opinion, where I actually think that they could develop a little bit into the regular season and towards the back end of it. I just think Detroit has a great team on paper, but I don't know if this is going to work. I think this is going to be like one of those classic NBA examples when you have three superstars on one team. And I don't think that's going to be the reason why, but I think this is like the perception that Detroit's going to be really good. And I just don't think they're going to be. So I'm going to put Detroit at 7.
If you remember from last year, Detroit ended up winning a game in overtime, and they needed, I believe, Washington to lose, or it was between them,
Yes.
Philadelphia, and Washington for that
It was
last
one of the
wild card.
craziest races ever. Like it was
Yeah,
very entertaining to watch. Yes.
and so I obviously they're going to come back and they're going to be very hungry thinking about that, and I just think that you look at teams like Toronto, they haven't had a good goaltender in forever, and they've just been so good up front, throughout their struggles, and they've been deep enough, and their stars have performed well to get into the playoffs, and I think that could happen here with Detroit. That's why I definitely have them a little bit higher. I have them, as a wild card team or maybe just missing again, but I really feel like this team improved a lot. They have a great top six. I mean, DeBrincat and Patrick Kane, we've already seen them and their chemistry. They brought them over. They both played in Chicago together, and then Larkin, one of the top centermen in the league, brought over Tarasenko, like we already mentioned. JT Comfort came over last year, and then Raymond, who they signed to an 8-year deal. So that right there is a great top six, and then you have Andrew Kopp, another veteran centering that third line, and Tyler Mott they brought over from Tampa Bay as well. So I really think they've and Austin Watson, excuse me, as well came from Ottawa. So honestly, I think they have a great lineup here on forward. Their defense, they have a great pairing in Ben Sherratt and Moritz Seider, Mata on the back end, and Justin Hall. Not the best defense, and the goaltending situation is definitely a problem. But I think if they're able to go on a run, we've seen Alex Lyon in the past when he was playing for the Panthers together, at least a solid stretch. So obviously the goaltending is their main problem, but I do think that this team should be ranked a little bit higher than 7. I think Montreal and Ottawa are similar as far as where their success is going to be this year, but I think Detroit, if they can really find a way to stay healthy, because they have a lot of older guys, a lot of veterans, any like Patrick Kane or Tarasenko could tweak something and then they're out for a few months, and that hurts and that kills your power play. This is a team that scores a lot of goals. They give up a lot of goals, but I think they have a great top six and excellent guys in the locker room for the younger guys to lean on. and learn from. And I think they have a great opportunity this season. And I could definitely see them being a wild card, even though they're in a division like the Atlantic, one of the toughest in the league. I have them a little higher. I guess we can put them like right here for now.
Yep.
So I would
Yeah,
say,
that's fine.
and then we can come back on that. So where do you think's next? I mean, where would you put Montreal on this list then if you wouldn't put them at 7?
So surprisingly for me, I was just thinking about that because I'm very skeptical because the way I think that this is going to go is I think that teams 1 through 7 are going to be very competitive. And I think Buffalo's kind of just going to be down there a little bit with more losses, but I really do think that 1 through 7 in this division is going to be very competitive with the win-loss ratio. So I could see, you know, 5, 6, and 7 interchanging on my list a lot throughout the year, but I'm going to try to predict it as best I can. I really do think Detroit would be 7. So I think Montreal for me, I have a lot of stock in them this year. I put them at 5. I would put Montreal at 5. And personally for me, I know this probably sounds crazy, and this is one of my hottest takes. I think Tampa is going to be 6th. I think it's going to be very close. That it could change. You know, I think Tampa could obviously be better than Montreal. I mean, Tampa's so good on paper with the Gensel addition, and I'll get a
Yeah,
little bit into that later. But I would probably put Montreal at 5.
I actually agree with you with putting Tampa low. I actually have them at 5 right now. Just think that they cleaned house. They lost a lot. Duclair, Rental, they lost. They lost Hayden Fleury, Barry Boulet, who is one of those new Montreal guys that I'm sure was on your mind. Then they had that trade with Sergachev. They got rid of him. He had an injury. I think it was out pretty much the whole year last year. Ended up picking up Connor Geeky, who's a rookie this year, JJ Moser in a 7th round. And then, I mean, we're going to get into this once we get to that division, but Stamkos era is over in Tampa. And so I do think that's going to play a major role. I mean, I don't
Absolutely.
care how old he is, how banged up he is, that hurts. Like, that is
Yes.
probably the best player to ever wear a Tampa Bay Lightning jersey.
Yep.
And that is not a hot take. I mean, he's done so much for that team. He put him on the map. I do think it was good that he moved on. We'll get into that in a later episode when we talk about the Preds, but a lot of new faces in that Lightning roster. They brought in Atkinson and also made a trade to get Jake Gensel from Carolina too, and Dumba coming over as well. But I do think that Tampa's going to finish a little lower this year. I have them at 5 right now. You have them at 6. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with them. You know, and of course, they still have their anchor in Vasilevsky as well. So when he's in there, I mean, they could easily be 1 or 2 with him. You know, you never
Correct.
know how he's going to play.
And
And last year, he didn't play until December. So
yeah, Vasilevsky is the game changer for me. Vasilevsky
he's a Hall of Famer.
he could propel Tampa Bay very high in this division just based off his own gameplay. But personally, he's been injured. I don't think he's necessarily going to lose a step, but I think he's going to start to slowly slow his growth down. I think he's almost sort of tapping into that. This is what he is, and he's great. But I don't think we're going to see like superstar, spectacular Vasilevsky. But obviously, he could carry Tampa Bay to the playoffs, no doubt, with how good he is. Just think they took a step back everywhere. Like you said, they lost a lot of guys. They lost Stamkos, they lost Duclair, but they also brought back Ryan McDonough from Nashville. So he's back on their defense, but he's another old guy that just has an awful contract. So Tampa Bay is going to be in a really tough situation from a management perspective soon. And like I said, if they could be anywhere, I'm going to put them at 6. I really like Montreal this year.
Yeah, and I think going back to Tampa, just to touch on this, having a good bench boss is very important in the NHL. You know, it's not the MLB. You don't have 160 games to play. You have 80. And every single night you go out, you lose 3 games in a row, you're losing momentum and you're losing games on the top teams in your division. And I think having John Cooper, obviously, he's won several times. He knows, when to give guys a chance to play up with his top guys. In Point and Kucherov turned Anthony Cirelli into an excellent player, I think. I think Connor Geeky's going to turn out to be a great player. And they also picked up Zemgus Girgensons from Buffalo, who I think can really. He's 30, but he's I'd say had a quiet career. He hasn't played a playoff game yet. I think he can be huge. I love Brandon Hagel's game as well. He's huge on the penalty kill, and Nick Paul, who has been a playoff gem for them. So I definitely wouldn't say Tampa's dead yet, but I think they're definitely going to have to take a step back, just judging by how that team has changed, and they're going to have to find some new players to step up and fill in that top six. I mean, Montreal, we can put Montreal at 5 right now, but then where do you think Tampa goes? 7?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we could put Tampa at 7. I mean, I think Tampa will probably be 6. I think you think they'll be at 5, but I
Yeah. I mean, I think because then where do you put Ottawa? You know what I mean? Like, there's no way Ottawa's top 4. I don't think.
yeah, well, I have them top 4 this year. So,
Okay. All right. Well, then let's get into that, and then we
yeah.
can build the list on from there because I want to hear your thoughts on Ottawa. Obviously, we talked about it already, but Linus Ullmark is their new netminder, and he just got inked. I think it was 3-year deal, so they're definitely happy about that in Ottawa.
Yeah, I'll dive into Ottawa a little bit. So for me, this is where the Atlantic Division gets really tough because, like I just said, Tampa Bay could jump in here anywhere. Personally, I do think, and I also think, depending on the growth of Montreal's team, they could jump into a wild card spot considering how young they are. Think about that. Their coach is Marty St. Louis, someone who's been there and done that for a really long time in a city that loves hockey so much. It's just flooded with hockey history in Montreal. That fan base has been dying to be back in the playoffs. And honestly, when you look at their top six and you look at their players on defense, and they have two spectacular goalies in Primo and Montembeault, I mean, this team has a very good chance to rank that high, and that's why I'm putting them there. And this is a similar reason as to why I'm going to probably put Ottawa at 4. And the reason I'm going to put Ottawa at 4 is because they added Allmark, and that's literally the only reason why I'm saying it is because I think this team has been there on paper, depth wise, on offense and defense for the last couple of years. They needed that goaltender. They've lacked it for such a long time, and the fact that they got that from Boston and Fleeson like this, I mean, why wouldn't they take that deal? They made their team so much better. And I know we're only a couple games in, but you can just tell the difference that Allmark has played. Yesterday, they beat the Kings like 9-8 in overtime,
8-7.
or 8-7, and that was a shootout game, and that was the game that Allmark didn't play. But as you can see, they're not giving up in the games anymore that Allmark isn't playing because they know that they can win every game that Allmark plays. They have a chance, so they can also win without him too. So it seems like their team is finally like chemistry wise starting to come together. And I know it's very early, but I also would have predicted this before the season started. I think Ottawa definitely with Allmark now is a playoff contender for sure. I don't know how far they can go, but what I've seen so far in a couple games to start the season, I think Ottawa looks fantastic with Allmark. And I think that like their defense is very well put together and their offense is very well put together. They can beat a lot of teams. I don't know if they can beat Florida yet, but I think they can compete with teams like Toronto and Boston for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, you hit, you know, the hammer right on the nail with the goalie situation. This team desperately needed a goalie, I think maybe more than anyone else. They were one of the bottom 10 teams in the league, but they also were bottom 5 in goals given up per game, just under 3.5. And then, the Sharks just under 4, but last year they were just god awful. But that's right around where the Blackhawks and Anaheim are, which two teams that are absolutely rebuilding right now. I think Ottawa going out getting Allmark is huge, and I really think that this is a year where these young guys, they've already seen it through the first couple of games of the year, are going to step up. The Josh Norris's Pinto, obviously suspended for a large portion of last season, but he signed a new 2-year deal, so they're expecting a lot out of him. Ridley Grieg, another guy who 22-year-old, they think they're going to get a lot out of him too. So a lot to be excited about in Ottawa. I don't think that they're going to make the playoffs this year just because they don't have that experience. I love Brady Tkachuk. They brought in Perron. Tim Stutzel is one of the most skillful players in the league, without a doubt. But I just think that Ottawa needs maybe another year, maybe even 2, until they can really find their core 6 and get a couple more years from the younger guys under their belt. Bringing in Ullmark, I think, is huge. But again, when Ullmark's not playing, what happens? They give up 7 goals, and that's in their own arena. They don't really have a set number 2 goaltender, and Ullmark can't play 82 games. And yeah, they were able to put 8 on the board against the Kings, who are a pretty solid team. But what's going to happen down the stretch when they need to go on a win streak to sneak into the wild card. I just don't know if this team is going to be able to do it. So I have them at 6 right now, and you said you had them at 4, so we can figure that out down the stretch. But now we're going to get into the top 4 teams. This is where it really gets interesting, especially just seeing that Ottawa's at 4 for you. You can kind of assume where you have your top 3, but I'm interested to see who your top 2 are.
For my top two, this is pretty difficult because, like I said, this division is very close. I think Toronto's going to be second, only because Toronto is a better, like they always play really good in the regular season, sort of the Bruins, obviously the last 2 years, but Toronto always seems to have accumulate a lot of regular season points and then choke in the playoffs. So I think Toronto will probably do the same thing because I don't think the Bruins are going to be that great this year, and I've already said that, but they will be a playoff team. I'll get into that in a minute. I think Toronto in the regular season will probably outperform the Bruins, so I think they're going to be second. Obviously, they with Sheldon Keefe, which I think was unbelievable. The fact that they let him walk and the fact that he walks into that New Jersey team, I think that's fantastic for them. I think Toronto made a big mistake letting Keefe go. Their problem was not the coach. The problem was the goaltending. It seemed like they found it with Wall at the end, but also Toronto's other problem is, and this has been the problem since Matthews and Nylander and Marner were drafted there, they have not put together a solid enough defensive core for the last, almost 10 years now because – they've always had Morgan Riley and then a bunch of players who have always choked in the playoffs and haven't helped their bad goaltending situation that they've always had. But in the regular season, I think they're going to be good. They lost Bertuzzi, but they kept Domi, who's a similar player. They added 2 Stanley Cup winners in Lawrence and Stolars from Florida, which was, I think, pretty good. And Stolars obviously is their starter with Wall being hurt right now, and he's looked okay. Berube gets hired, the old St. Louis coach who has a Stanley Cup on his record, but Babcock had a couple Stanley Cups on his record, and it didn't seem to help Toronto. I think they're still cursed. However, I think they'll play pretty good in the regular season. I think they'll accumulate a lot of points, especially if Wall comes back and plays like he did against Boston in that first round last year. And they also added Pacioretty, who's been around the block, but obviously was a big Canadian player over in Montreal. They also, another addition that I really liked for their team was Chris Tanev from Dallas. The fact that they got him and they were able to sign him to a big deal. He is a really good defensive defenseman that just can anchor your defense. I really believe that. So I think that was step one to adding to their defense. However, I still think this team will be cursed come playoff time. But in the regular season, I could see this team easily surpassing 100 points on the regular season. I think they're going to probably be second. And then obviously, I think first will be Florida. I think Florida is probably going to be the best team again. They did lose a couple pieces on their roster. However, when you look at the competition, I still think that they're above everybody else just a little bit. Bobrovsky's still pretty solid in net for them. They obviously get Spencer Knight back on the roster. He's looked a little shaky to start the 2024-2025 season. However, I think he'll probably come around, hopefully. His potential was very high coming out of Boston College at one point. They lost Montour at the point, which was big because he was their quarterback of their power play. But they added a younger Adam Boqvist from Columbus, who was supposed to be very good years ago. And I think he will work out very well. He obviously is with Jesper from Boston. Jesper signed there as well. So the Boqvist brothers are there. And honestly, to start the year, Boqvist has been great on the power play. Also added a lot of depth pieces in Nate Schmidt. They also added AJ Greer, another former Bruin. So they added depth pieces. They also lost guys too. For the most part, they kept their core. And I think that Florida has one of the best forechecks I've seen in such a long time in hockey. And I still think they have that. I don't think anyone's beating their forecheck, and it seems like their defense is always shut down, and it always seems like they pry these younger defensive guys. Like they pried Forsling away from Chicago years ago for like nothing off waivers, and they turned him into a top tier defenseman. I'm hoping they honestly do the same with Boqvist because I think Boqvist used to have a lot of potential. I think Florida still will command the top spot in this division. I still honestly think they'll be the best team in the Eastern Conference this year. I'd like to know what you think for your top 4, though, Pat.
Yeah, so since you're just talking about Florida, I'll start with them. Obviously, you got to have them high. I do think that they're not going to be, number 1. I have the Bruins at 1, which, not biased, maybe a little biased. With the expectations for Boston, I do think that they are going to have a great regular season. But going back to the Panthers, I mean, this is the expectation now, obviously coming off the win. But looking at what happened, over the playoffs. I mean, this is a team, like you said, excellent at forecheck, and they just fight and fight. And they aren't the most skillful team. They're not the best team, but they just grind away teams. And right now, they're the Bruins' kryptonite. I do think that they're going to finish in the top three in this division. Again, we haven't seen them be the continuous top two teams. I mean, they snuck in from the wild card, and they were just a point better than Boston last year, who finished that season terribly. And again, they lost a lot of guys. They lost Kevin Stenlund on that blue line. Oposto also went with them to Utah. Nick Cousins, who has been a huge part of the playoffs, just an absolute grinder, great forechecker. He's now with Ottawa. And Ryan Lomberg, who was just a pain in the ass to play against in the playoffs as well. He's to Calgary, Mahura, and Tarasenko, obviously out the door as well. So Florida had to bring in a couple new guys. They did end up signing Lundell, and they do have a couple of guys that they need to sign under contract next year. They're going to make the playoffs again. That's the identity now around Florida. But I do think that they have a target on their back. And I think that every single time someone matches up against him, they're going to play him hard. We've already seen it twice this year against the Bruins. They're just going at it with each other, and it feels like a playoff game every single time you watch this team. I think Bobrovsky, again, one of the best goaltenders in the league, is going to have another great season. But I think for the Panthers, they're not the best regular season team. They'll make the playoffs. I have them at 3. And then talking about Toronto, I also have them at 2. And you want to talk about a team with rentals and a team just cleaning house even more than Tampa. I mean, they had is rentals. We've seen it in the past. Bertuzzi, see you later. He was terrible with them. Giordano, they brought in for some veteran experience. He's gone. Klingberg is also gone. Brody, Joel Edmondson. So they got rid of a lot of guys, brought in Hakanpää. They re-signed Domi, I believe. And then Nick Robertson, who I think is going to have a huge role on this team. He's in the top 6 right now. Again, this team comes at you with a ton of offense. Their goaltending's been the issue, and I think that's going to definitely hold them back a little bit. Bring in Stolarz. I don't think they expected him to be the starting goalie right away, and that's what he is right now. Joseph Wool's on the IR. They dealt Samsonov. This team is a Shesterkin or a Swayman away from a Stanley Cup, but for some reason, they are just the definition of a dominating regular season team. And in the playoffs, they just can't get it done. They'll be in the postseason again. And they have, obviously extremely excellent talent in Matthews, Nyes, and Marner on that first line. And then, of course, they got Willie Nylander as well. Touched on how they brought in Pacioretty, another guy with playoff experience. But I do think that this team is just, I don't know what it is, but they cannot get it done in the playoffs. And maybe getting rid of Sheldon Keefe can help them do that somehow. I know he's a great coach, but I don't think they're ready to blow up that top line because they understand and they see the talent and success that they have. But unless they get a goaltender, I mean, it's just another year out the window. And then you're going into another season with the highest of hopes and the highest of expectations. And you have Anthony Stolarz, who hasn't been a starting goalie on a team in his career yet. So honestly, I don't understand what's going on with Toronto. We'll see him again in the playoffs, but unless they pick up a goalie, I don't see them going far again. And so I think we'll put them where do you think we put them? 2 or 3?
2.
Said 2. All right, so we'll go 2 there. And then, yeah, I mean, that just leaves the Bruins. So we've already touched on them a little bit over the offseason. They've given us a bit of frustration, but if you want to start with that, we can go into there.
Yeah, so most people know how I feel about the Bruins, so I won't go in too much depth. But basically, yes, they added 2 good players in Zadorov and Lindholm. In my opinion, they overpaid a little bit too much, which also played kind of a big role, in my opinion, in the Swayman deal. But re-signing Swayman kind of essentially locked up a playoff spot in my eyes for them. I honestly wasn't that faithful in this team before they signed Swayman because I don't think this team is honestly as good as it seems on paper. but they played all right to start the year. The defense I thought was going to be the bright spot. That's the bad spot to start the year. I didn't think our depth on up front on offense was going to be good enough, but it seems to be because our fourth line has played as our best line on the offense so far to start the year, which is unbelievable. But that's typical Boston Bruins fashion. A lot of stuff surprises you during the season. So I don't know. There's a long, list of games remaining in the regular season, but I think the Bruins will probably be in third place in the Atlantic Division this year. I think they'll be neck and neck with Toronto. I think they're going to probably perform well because of Swayman. I don't have a lot of faith in this team because we never really see it. Every year in the playoffs, they seem to just always break my heart and our hearts, and they always seem to have the talent on paper, and then it just never translates to the top dog. I've already seen through two times this season already through Florida, we can't beat them. And that's why I just can't put them at first place right now. And I still think that they'll be neck and neck with Toronto. So second or third place for me, but I'm going to go with third right now, considering Toronto's regular season success.
So I have them at one, and the reason why is pretty simple. We have had needs, problems, things that we needed to fix. And although it didn't go as smoothly as we know with the Swayman situation and overpaying, our big guns that we brought in, we did take care of those needs. We have our goaltender for the future. We brought in our center that we've needed for 3 years. We brought in plenty of size on the defense. We cut out the weak links. And I think that not only did we get better on defense, we got our goalie back, but now it opens things up for us, like on the power play. The Bruins were bottom three in the league. Well, top three in the league as far as losing points in overtime and shootouts. And so you get your goalie back, Swayman. He's going to get 75, 80% of the start. So that definitely limits some of that damage. But then you bring in Lindholm. Finally, you're able to have a very strong top line in Lindholm, Pastrnak, and Zacha. And that's not even including Marchand. Now, we've already seen Zadorov, what his game is. If you didn't know anything about him, he likes to hit people. And that's definitely been a bright spot for us. That takes the pressure off guys like McAvoy and Carlo. These guys aren't big bodies that are supposed to go out there and hit people. They're puck movers. They get involved, and they're strong on their stick. And so bringing in Zadorov, a guy that if someone's messing with Swayman and you got to clear traffic out, that's the guy. So it lets everyone on the defense kind of take care of their best skill sets and do what they were brought in to do. And I think that just bringing in Lindholm, obviously, I think we're not the depthiest team, and there's still a lot of work to be done. I do think that having Lindholm, just a center like him, a guy that has a lot to prove and a lot of chances for opportunity. We've already seen him have a great start as far as points the beginning of the year. I think the Bruins are taking care of their needs, and this team definitely had a chance to win the division last year. They had a really bad finish to the year, and that obviously allowed the Panthers to catch us in points. But I do think that it's expectations are high for the Bruins. They're going to be in the playoffs again. And right now they've had a slow start, but they just got to figure out the chemistry. They have the stars, they have a great leader in Marchand, and they have excellent depth on the back end. And that's really all you need in a team, especially in the regular season where all you have to do is go out and win games. So I have them at one right now. So this is our list for the Atlantic Division. We're going to be going over every division in the NHL. So hope you guys enjoyed this one. Stay tuned for the next one, and we're going to continue to grind. Very excited that NHL is here, NBA soon as well. So stay tuned for that, and we appreciate the support.